I will start with as I said, with a few words about the research. Then we'll move to hydroexpertise. We will focus a bit on the formation of Czechoslovak hydroexpertise and also on a formation of the practice of exporting it. We'll also look a bit on the forms of its export. Then, if we will have time, I will show you the involvement of Czechoslovak hydro technopolitics in Ghana on this specific case. And then I think we'll move to some kind of a conclusion. I also prepared some questions for us, and we will move to discussion. So let's start. Firstly, I need to talk a bit about the research aims I had. Of course, I think the most important, the center of the whole research was the analysis of forms, let's say, of some actual practices, objectives of the specific model of export of kind of Czechoslovak water management expertise and also technologies. And they're changing. Especially I was focusing on a period between 1960s and 1980s, because this era was, I think, the most turbulent in this specific expertise. I also tried to look on Czechoslovak hydroexperts as some actors, as let's say some players or co-players in the global hydroexpertise, which means the discussion, the global discussion between hydroexperts and their involvement into this global hydroexpert community. That was the goal. I worked with the Cold War context, of course. I worked in period 1960s to 1980s, so it was impossible to avoid it. And I worked with this context as with an accelerator of the whole process, the process of let's say the dam building and let's say pushing hydroexpertise somewhere and using it. And I also tried to look on the relationship between the state and its experts. Of course, on example of Czechoslovakia, mostly. And of course, I also wanted to contribute to some ongoing debates. One of it was the debate on the practices and motivations of the Eastern Bloc modernization efforts in Global South, because all case studies I chose were from these regions or this space, let's say. It's not the region, but space. So basically these aims I had when I started my research. Just the brief characteristics of my dissertation. I divided it to 6 chapters. One chapter was introductory chapter, of course. One was focused on export, how it changed in time, how were the practices of export. And this chapter was mainly from the perspective of the state and its institutions. Another chapter was similar, but I tried to look on the whole problematics through the lenses of experts, and they are sending the process of choosing of them, the process of preparing of them, their everyday life in the locations to which they were sent, their memories, their perspective of this whole procedure, etc. And three chapters were about 3 case studies I had there. One case study was the Ghanaian story. I will show you later. And this case study happened, let's say, mainly 1960s. Second one was the case study of Egypt and the planned involvement of Czechoslovaks in the building, the construction of High Aswan Dam, which has never happened, but it was planned and stopped by Soviets. So I wanted to show some kind of a Soviet Czechoslovak dynamics in these huge waterworks projects. And the third one was Ethiopian case, which was about not so well known, I guess, project of Malta Vakana, which was a huge dam in Ethiopia, which was built in 1980s. And it was the first project where Czechoslovak hydroexperts cooperated officially cooperated with Soviets and with Ethiopians on one project. So that was quite historical project, let's say. So that's the reason why I chose it. I worked with various archives from Czechoslovakia, also with the National Archives in London, with Ghanaian archives. Unfortunately, I had no opportunity to visit Ethiopia. So I worked only with the newspapers and with some documents which were shared with me from the side of my colleagues. And thanks to some connections with the Dutch researchers, I had the opportunity to work with materials from World Bank archives. So let's say these archives were the most important archives for me. Because I think that global dam building process, the building process of dams and huge waterworks is let's say, a global phenomenon. That's the reason why I chose global history approach, which I think was, let's say, the most fitting for this story I wanted to tell. And in this, let's say, I followed works of Vincent Lachendiek and Frederick Schulze mainly, who are editors of that book we are contributing, and which will be published this summer, and which is mostly about the global dam building, and also works with the global history approach. So I just wanted to show you how I try to think about the whole topic. And now let's move to more, let's say, factographical part of the presentation. So yeah, I need to explain how I understand technopolitics, because that's the, let's say, it's even in the title of the whole work. So I think about it as about the hybrid of politics and techniques, let's say, which started to be put into practice mainly during the 20th century. I worked with, of course, there are many definitions of technopolitics from the pen of Timothy Mitchell or Gabriel Hecht, which, yeah, this definition was for me probably the most useful, let's say, because it's quite clear. And I mixed it with, let's say, the way how Chris Sneddon also think about technopolitics. Chris Sneddon, maybe you know his works. He wrote quite important books about, let's say, call it the concrete revolution, the global building, the global dam building era of 20th century. Of course, nowadays he's quite criticized for some things, because he thinks mostly that everything started in the US, and that was the only model which was then exported to the whole world. But we don't think it's just about the US. So that's probably the most criticized piece of his research. But still, I definitely worked with this. I also think that technopolitics was quite a powerful tool of Cold War rivalry, especially in the global South space. And I think that it was something which was put into practice or used not only these industrial giants like Soviet Union or United States, but also by smaller state actors like Czechoslovakia or GDR or even Hungary, these countries. And we could find many fields of technopolitics which were used in the region of Global South. And the one which I think was, for me, the most interesting and maybe in some things a bit unique is the field of hydroexpertise, let's say. How do I understand hydroexpertise? Basically, as a body of knowledge related to water management. That's probably the most basic definition. I think that it consists of all disciplines which are needed to build waterworks. So it's not just about dam building, it's also about equipping of these structures, especially when they are used for hydropower purposes, which means the whole machinery like turbines, generators, these all things, and creating of these things I put under the term of hydroexpertise. And also more theoretical fields like hydrology, geology, hydrophysicists, and these things which are important for surveys which need to be done before implementing of any huge or big, large waterworks. What I think is quite unique on this field is that it's a part of, I guess, all modernization models which were used during the Cold War. Because the idea of modernization, and it doesn't matter if we are talking about the socialist, the modernization model, or let's say the Western modernization model, one of these models. All these models worked with the water as with something which brings sanitation to the cities, electrification to the homes, let's say. Of course, it's important for development of industry because every factory needs electricity. And this, let's say, kind of modernization is important to modernize. It's necessary to modernize the whole society. So water definitely, I think, was unique in this because, I don't know, maybe some other fields like, I don't know, creating and sending some arms, for example, somewhere, or sending some machinery somewhere, or I'm lacking examples right now, but I just think that water was in the center of all, let's say, ideas of modernization. And that's the reason why it was quite a useful political tool in the form of technopolitics, as I tried to explain earlier. Okay, what's this?
It's a teaser for the next.
Probably, yeah. So now I will try to talk a bit about the hydroexpertise in Czechoslovakia, because I did it all on an example of Czechoslovakia and Czechoslovak activities in this field in the space of Global South. So we need to form it somehow, and then we need to start to export it. So few words about the formation of Czechoslovak hydroexpertise. Czechoslovakia had a really long tradition of waterworks. It's given by a few factors. One is that it started quite early. It started at the end of 19th century, which means that it's a bit Austrian-Hungarian legacy in some ways. The first waterworks here were implemented at the same time when, for example, huge dams in India or in Egypt were built. Like the same, basically, we have dams here in Czech Republic, which are, or even in Slovakia, which are from the same times, like Low S1 dam, for example, or even a bit older. What was also quite important was well-developed engineering industry, especially machinery. This was even more important when hydropower started to be important. During the pre-war period and then in 1920s, in Czechoslovakia started hydrocracy, some kind of hydrocracy started to be formed. And these experts, let's say, were quite immediately employed by companies which had, even in these times, some kind of foreign interests and foreign activities. I'm talking mainly about Lana company and the Škoda company. These two companies cooperated very often, and they had some business in Iran, in Iraq, even in Egypt. I put there a picture of this huge grain silo that's in Tehran, and this was built in 1920s, 1930s by Lana there, and it was really important for the future, let's say, dam building experience, because when you look at it, you can see it. It's a huge structure made of concrete, and dams needed some experience with this kind of a massive concreting, which means that experts who worked on this later worked on, for example, building the Vltava cascade. So structures like this maybe are not on the first side connected with dams, but on the second side definitely are. And thanks to let's say these pre-war and experience from 1920s, 1930s, Czechoslovakia became later, 1950s, 1960s, yeah, hydraulic leader of the Eastern Bloc, of course, except Soviet Union, with Soviet Union. I already mentioned that the export started even in 1920s, 1940s. Of course, Second World War was era when all these activities declined or were stopped, and all experts were recalled back to Czechoslovakia. But immediately after Second World War, they started to be sent again to these locations. And what is interesting is on this process is that the communist coup d'etat from 1948 and the nationalization of all these companies like Lana, Škoda, etc., did not affect these foreign activities at all. It was not an obstacle, not for the experts and not for the customers. They didn't care. I read a few documents in which was written that, well, yeah, there are some kind of reorganization in Prague, but that's not our business. We just want our dam. So that's quite interesting that this was definitely not any cornerstone, I mean, year 1948, for this expert community and for the foreign activity for export of hydroexpertise to global south countries, let's say, or some maybe also to some European countries. What is also interesting is that, as I said, it was not the coup d'etat which stopped the foreign activities, but it was something which happened after, during 1950s, and that was massive, really massive domestic dam building activity, which needed to recall all experts back to Czechoslovakia, stopped let's say the foreign activities of these previously private companies, and also this domestic building activity brought unification or centralization of the whole capacity, let's say, which means the designing capacity, also the capacity of experts, and also the capacity of machinery. Because in 1950s, 1960s, the whole Vltava cascade, or the main projects are implemented. For example, huge, I think that was maybe the biggest, the largest project which was built until this one was Orava Dam, Slovakia. This guy, Alois Kraus, worked for Lana company. Then he traveled to Tehran. He was one of these guys who built that great civil I showed you. And he was recalled back, and he was probably the only person in Czechoslovakia, maybe, with the experience to solve some serious troubles they faced during the building of Orava Dam. He's not signed under this project, but he was sent there as a kind of a spin doctor for the main engineer there. And I don't know, but maybe without Alois Kraus, we would not have Orava Dam, because it was, yeah, there were serious troubles. But it stopped his journey around India, where he was sent in 1947 to map some future opportunities for gaining new contracts and building dams in India. So he was recalled back, and he has never came back to India, which means that India was not important for Czechoslovakia anymore. So yeah, the main message is that the domestic building activity was, let's say, preferred than the foreign activities and export in 1950s, and at the beginning of 1960s. What happened in 1960s? At the beginning of 1960s, let's say almost all important domestic projects were finished. And we still had this kind of industrial complex, I would say, which consisted of some designing companies like Hydroprojekt Praha, which was let's say a local copy of Hydroprojekt Institute, Soviet designing company. And Hydroprojekt designed almost all Czechoslovak dams and large waterworks. Its branch was called Hydroconsult Bratislava. In this complex were also these companies like ČKD Blansko, which was the main creator of turbines, Škoda, which was the main creator of generators, Sigma Olomouc, which was the main creator of turbines also, but also pumps, water pumps. And of course, there were many others, but these three, I guess, are the most well-known and the most important. And there were also institutions which work in the water research, like Výzkumný ústav vodního hospodářství, water research institution. So all these institutions knew, after the experience from 1950s, how to work together, and their capacities started to be open. So Czechoslovakia, of course, was also connected with the international situation and with the independence of many new states in Africa, in Southeast Asia. So Czechoslovakia wanted to use these capacities to generate some money, also to use it for some goals of their foreign politics. I will talk about it later a bit. So all these companies, all this complex was, let's say, through the Ministry of Foreign Trade and its companies like Technoexport or Polytechna. So this complex was, let's say, sold, exported to Global South, or offered to Global South, and it also served to the goals of the foreign politics. That's what I wanted to say. Here, this is my own map, which should show us the range of export, let's say, Czechoslovak hydraulics expertise and technology. I think it's not complete, but I based it on data where I was sure that Czechoslovak institutions, let's say, tried to get contracts in these countries, or even were successful in getting contracts in these countries. So you can see that there are almost all countries of Latin America, many countries of Africa, almost all countries of Southeastern Asia. So it was quite a range. There are also, let's say, countries which were a bit connected maybe more to the West, which is also quite interesting, like Iceland, for example. So in all these countries, there were some kind of activity of Czechoslovak hydro experts. If I would put there experts who did not work under directly under Czechoslovak institutions, but worked under the auspices of some international organizations like United Nations Development Program or ICOLD or some other institutions, it would be even more red, the map. There would be even more countries. Yeah, a few words about the state motivations for export. That was a quite specific motivation, was a promoting of socialism, which was, I think, important mainly in 1960s. But at the end of 1960s, it started to be quite obvious that it's not bringing so much fruits they wanted to get. So they, let's say, kept this in the rhetorics, but they focused more on gaining raw materials and hard currency. Raw materials because, of course, Czechoslovakia had not any direct connections with any former colonies, which means that the gaining of cocoa beans, for example, which were quite important for Czechoslovak chocolate factories like Orion. So they needed to secure it somewhere. So that was the reason why activities in Africa were quite, let's say, connected with this. Also diamonds, phosphates, some ores, gold, silver, copper, all these things were parts of agreements and contracts they signed with mainly African countries. Hard currency. What do I mean with this? Well, you probably know that Czechoslovak crown was not convertible on the global markets, which means that if Czechoslovak government, through its companies, through the Ministry of Foreign Trade, wanted to buy something from the West, they needed to pay in dollars or in pounds or Swiss francs. And how should they get it? Of course, through the international trade. It was one way, or through export of expertise and through these contracts with global South countries. I will show you. I tried to put it into the small scheme. We can see, or we can take as an example, some kind of relations between Ghana and Czechoslovakia. At the beginning, there was a governmental agreement, let's say, between the government of Ghana and the government of Czechoslovakia. But that was just, let's say, a general agreement that these countries will cooperate in some kind of scientific and technological ways. Then Czechoslovak government, let's say, involved its Ministry of Foreign Trade, which used its companies or foreign trade companies like Polytechna, which was used mainly for, let's say, exporting experts, people, or Technoexport, which was used mainly for the export of technologies, machinery, these things. Hydroexpert, of course, also, or Omnipol, which was quite famous for trade with weapons, with arms. And there were like 20, 30 of these companies. And these companies then signed specific contracts with the Ghanaian government. In these contracts was specified how many pounds, for example, will get each expert who will be sent to Ghana to I don't know, work in a geographical survey somewhere, or the hydrological survey, or work as a doctor somewhere in hospital. And but there was also specified that this money will not be paid directly to the experts, but will be paid to Polytechna. Polytechna took some part of this amount to its own pocket, And it was not such a small amount of money. It was sometimes even more than half of this salary, and then redistribute the money and send it to the experts. And these are real numbers, which I found in the archive of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from year 1962. And of course, workers, I mean experts, then they did some work for the government. So they were responsible. Their responsibility was to the government, not to Polytechna. So it's.
Sir, is this what was the unit? Is this an annual income per researcher, or like the £300 or?
Yeah, that's per one expert. Yeah. I think these I put there pictures of engineers because I thought that we're talking about dams, but I have to say frankly that these numbers are numbers related to doctors. So, but it was similar. There were not such a big differences, so I think we can use it as an example quite easily. And the profit per year was 10 to 15 millions Czechoslovak crowns. They call it devis crowns, like devizových korun. So we can imagine it in dollars or in pounds. These hard currencies. So I think it's quite funny how this money were redistributed, and I think it was not such a small source of these hard currency for Czechoslovak foreign trade, let's say. Yeah, another teaser. I don't know why it is there, but so now let's look more on forms of export. One of the earliest forms I identified was some kind of, I call it a fraternal aid. That was some kind of a cooperation through Comecon, which started in late 1950s when, let's say, the major projects in Czechoslovakia were already finished, but there was still something to do. And this cooperation was mainly based on some kind of a bilateral agreements. And Czechoslovakia assisted to Poland, Romania, Bulgaria with their own hydraulic projects, waterworks. It was almost in all cases in designing some specific projects or with creating their hydraulic plants. In Czech, I would say vodohospodářský plán, vodosměrný plán. Of course, there were, even in these times, there were some non-European activities, let's say, and these activities were mainly in China and in North Korea. There was a lot of infrastructure which was damaged by Korean War. So at the late 1950s, Czechoslovak experts helped to design new dams there and repair the older infrastructure and these things. So that was the first stage, I would say. In 1960s, as I already mentioned, hundreds of contracts started with, especially in the global South countries. Again, these contracts were mainly based on bilateral agreements implemented by Ministry of Foreign Trade. I mentioned it. And its companies. Technoexport was one of the most important. Polytechna, of course, when we're talking about sending experts. And also there were some plans to help, let's say, with the development of huge or large waterworks like High Aswan Dam, for example. There was a big ambition to do it, which was stopped. Hydrological surveys were quite important because Czechoslovakia had quite an army of geologists, hydrogeologists, these guys, and their expertise was quite appreciated, even internationally. So they worked in Ghana, in Mali, in Guinea. And even in early 1960s, Czechoslovakia started to send turbines and generators to Cuba, for example. And in this time, one specific kind of water work, let's say, type started to be quite popular, and Czechoslovakia started to be quite good in supplementing this. And I'm talking about pumping waterworks or dams. I mean, čerpávací vodní elektrárny. Yeah, and there were also technical measurements held in Výzkumný ústav vodního hospodářství, that water research institution, which worked for Ceylon, for Iraq, for Angola, for their governments and for their projects. So I think these kind of activities were maybe the most used. Yeah, a few pictures I will show you more later. These are Czechoslovak experts in Ghana. The guy who is pointing to the map is René Sameš, one of the most prominent Czechoslovak hydroexperts who also participated in building Vltava Cascade, especially Orlík Dam, which was one of the biggest, let's say, structure of socialism in Czechoslovakia, and it was used quite a lot for showing it as a success of socialism in Czechoslovakia, and almost all foreign visits which came to Prague were brought to Orlík. There are many pictures of African presidents and leaders standing on the edge of Orlík Dam to see how good are we in this. Yeah, and the last segment, I guess, international organizations. The experts there were sent mainly through Polytechna. Yeah, we can talk about the United Nations in the first place, of course, but yeah, especially at UNESCO, which was also focused on educating, let's say, experts from African countries, for example, in their expertise, the ability to build their own capacities of hydroexpertise. United Nations development projects, of course. ICOLD, International Commission on Large Dams, very important organization. Czechoslovakia was one of the first members of this, one of the establishing members of this organization. And in the 1960s, Ladislav Votruba served, it was also a Czechoslovak hydro expert, served as a vice president of this organization. Of course, there was some aspect of parity between, let's say, Western and Eastern countries in these leading positions of international organizations, but still, it's reflecting the very good reputation of Czechoslovak experts in this strictly expert organization. It was not a political organization; it was an expert organization. Still exists. Yeah, and many others were, let's say, in charge of some United Nations developmental projects in Africa, in Asia, in Burma, for example. So I think it reflects a very good international reputation of Czechoslovak hydroexpertise. Of course, there was a big topic is the circulation of knowledge, especially in the context of Cold War. According to my research, I think Czechoslovak hydroexperts were quite active members of the global expert community. They were in touch with experts all around the world. They met them on congresses, workshops. There was a lot of correspondence between them. Of course, there were journals which circulated around the world. Of course, the Iron Curtain was not an obstacle for this kind of circulation. This map shows the research journey, let's say, kind of an internship of Czechoslovak hydroexperts around the United States and around Canada in 1960s. On the picture, see it? Yeah, perfect. This guy is that Alois Kraus, we've met already. And this guy is called, there's Mr. Domini, who was the head of United States Bureau for Reclamation. That was quite a well-known organization which was responsible for building dams in the United States, like Hoover Dam, Boulder Dam, all these huge projects. And also they implemented one of the, let's say, the model scheme of the whole river basin development. I'm talking about TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, which then served as something which United States exported mainly to Africa and to Southeastern Asia, and it was there was a strong political connotation around this scheme and around this this project. Yeah, we could talk about TVA hours and hours, but I think that's not the purpose of this. What I wanted to show is that Czechoslovak experts were in contact, let's say, with the most prominent American experts. And there were exchange of their works, let's say. For example, Alois Kraus published some new methods in using concrete and mixturing concrete for building dams or something like that. And it was really, really appreciated by Western expert circles, for example. And that was the reason why they were invited to United States. So it was really, really connected, and I think it supports the idea of dam building as a global phenomenon. Yeah, do we still have time?
We are about 40 minutes in.
Okay.
And we advertise a talk that it finishes with the questions at 4:30. So I wonder how many slides you.
I could be very brief.
You don't need to be, but I just wonder, do you remember perhaps how many slides?
Maybe like 4 slides up and a lot of pictures.
Yeah, I think 4 slides, that would be just great. And with this speed, we are just fine.
Perfect. So yeah, I decided to put there one specific example of Czechoslovak using Czechoslovak practice in technopolitics, and that's the example of Ghana. So, few words about Czechoslovakia and Ghana. And the establishing of diplomatic relations became basically immediately when Ghana was gained its independence, and when Soviet Union did it. Ghana was quite a country of a priority interest for Czechoslovakia because of the kind of a socialist regime there, because Kwame Nkrumah, the first Ghanaian president, was quite friendly to socialist countries. The cooperation between these countries was inspired maybe mostly by the idea of industrialization, and very suddenly some expert and student exchanges started to be realized. We're talking about 1960s, early 1960s. So I think, especially in the case of Ghana, the propaganda of socialism was not just a rhetoric. There was a real will to do it. A bit naive, but still. And I mentioned the cocoa beans, and that Ghana is, I think, until nowadays, the second biggest producer of cocoa beans. So this was a big motivation for cooperation. Also, some ores, gold, because the former colony of Gold Coast was the name of Ghana. So gold was also something which they were able to get from this country. About hydrotechnopolitics. In early 1960s, there were some meetings between Czechoslovak and Ghanaian presidents, and there was a plan on the table that Czechoslovakia might appear in the contract for building one of the biggest dams which were ever built in not only in Africa, but I think all around the world, and that's Akosombo Dam on the River Volta. So Czechoslovakia offered their help, and Kwame Nkrumah said, yeah, maybe we will not reach deal with United States or with some other partners, we can cooperate. They did not at the end, but there were some technical missions to Southwest Ghana between year 1961 and 1968 to make some hydrogeological surveys and, let's say, to find suitable locations for future dams. And two designs of dams were then designed and sent to Ghana. Unfortunately, none of these dams were ever built, but they are still on the table. And I heard that the Ghanaian government right now is considering even these two Czechoslovak projects to put into practice, which means that maybe they will be implemented at the end. Here, a few words about experts. Yeah, this is the era where they worked. These are two projects which might be implemented in future years, but were designed in 1960s. Yeah, this is the visualization of one of these projects. Czechoslovak experts and their local co-workers. Yeah, and I also, unfortunately, I have no time to put it into this presentation, but one part of my dissertation is also of the everyday life of these experts in Ghana, and not only in Ghana, but in their destinations. And it's also based on stories of 6 of these experts and some interviews with them. So yeah, I would like to explain it more, but we don't have time for this, so maybe in discussion. Yeah, a few articles from local newspapers. Czechoslovak experts is René Sameš, that guy we saw already. This guy built the Dlouhé Stráně, by the way. Antonín Petlach, he designed it. Yes, and just a short conclusion. So I think that Czechoslovakia was, with the Soviet Union, a hydraulic leader of the whole Eastern Bloc, and it was a strong exporter of water management, know-how, and technology. I would say mainly in 1960s to 1980s era. That was probably the strongest period. There was a functional export model based on a complex of industrial unit, which I think in some ways was similar to arms exports, because there was also an industrial complex unit which participated in this. And yeah, I showed the scheme, so it's quite clear, I guess. What is important for Czechoslovak hydroexpertise and using of it, I think, is a continuity. Because there is a continuity from the pre-war era even to nowadays, I would say. And this continuity goes mainly on the line of experts, not only the line of institutions or companies, because they were changing sometimes, but the line of experts who served to these, let's say, how to say, shifting institutions, or if is it clear? There were shifts in forms and motivations of Czechoslovak hydro export from late 1950s to late 90s, 1980s. Let's say from the idealistic vision to export socialism, or to use these technologies to promote socialism, to a business model, to model how to gain money and generate it. That's the hydro money machine we mentioned in our chapter. There were examples of cooperation between Czechoslovakia and Western countries, which is also interesting, and it supports the theory of let's say, some kind of a global phenomenon. I mean, the dam building as a global phenomenon, because when you would like to build a dam, you will probably not be able to do it with just one company. You will need to put various expertise on the one place. And if you are Uganda, for example, you will not be able to do it. You will need to chop the whole contract to smaller contracts, and then invite British companies, Italian companies, Czechoslovak companies, why not, Romanian companies to fulfill these smaller contracts. And during implementing of these smaller contracts, Czechoslovakia cooperated with Western countries and Western companies, and also in gaining contracts from global South countries. There was a clear rivalry between countries of Eastern Bloc, because, for example, there was a contract on a geological survey, that hydrogeological survey in Ghana, and there was a Hungarian company, and there was a Czechoslovak company, and they both wanted to get this contract. Sometimes there was kind of a communication between these Eastern Bloc states, and they made some agreement who will take it, or maybe they will cooperate on it, but sometimes not. Sometimes it was a normal business competition, which is also quite interesting because we're talking about Eastern Bloc countries. And yeah, I think that's quite a small conclusion, that the Czechoslovak hydro expansion in Africa has become part of the global hydro expansion, which means that Africa was the region where Czechoslovak hydroexpertise even more connected, more merged with the global expertise. And yeah, last two conclusions are a bit like questions, so maybe you can discuss it. I think it's possible to look at Africa in some ways as on a kind of a hydraulic laboratory, because Czechoslovak hydro experts who were sent to Africa were greenhorns in many ways. So they were sent there to, of course, to implement some contracts, but also to learn something. And in Africa, there were opportunities to learn things which were not in Czechoslovakia, because there were not such a good geographical, for example, conditions for building new dams. Everything was built already. So go to Africa and build something there. So maybe we can look on Africa as kind of a laboratory. It's something. It's not my let's say finding. It's something which was also formulated by Sarah Pritchard in the context of French presence in Algeria. So we're talking a bit about kind of a colonial discourse, maybe. Definitely not about a partnership, let's say, between these two countries. And another question, which I would hear, because we did not talk about experts a lot, is that Czechoslovak hydro experts were, of course, in service of socialist regime. But when I discussed with them this, I found that most of them were not, let's say, very open to socialist ideology, or some of them were even against it. Of course, we need to be careful because in saying this, because they were definitely not dissidents or something like that. But some of them were even not members of the party, the Communist Party. And they went to Africa because their expertise was a stronger card, let's say, to play.